Good afternoon. And as always, welcome to those who are joining us on the internet. Jumping right in. And I am reading from the transcript as prepared by Bill Thetford. Ideas do not leave the mind which thought them to have a separate being, nor do separate thoughts conflict with one another in space, because they do not occupy space at all. Ideas do not leave the mind which thought them. Your individuality is an idea in the mind of God. And the idea is the idea of God. In other words, the idea is all that God is. Now, you're familiar with the statement, ideas leave not their source. That means that it's absolutely impossible for you to leave your source. Or to modify in any way what you are. So, you are not able to leave the mind which thought you to have a separate being or existence. And I'm going to say, nor do individual thoughts conflict with one another in space, because they, meaning you, do not occupy space at all. Again, you are conscious awareness, mind, in which the experience of time and space is occurring, in which all of creation is occurring. Continuing, however, human ideas can conflict in content because they occur at different levels and include opposite thoughts at the same level. And when we're speaking of levels here, we could relate them to the two different operating systems that we were talking about. And this is a very important statement. It is impossible to share opposing thoughts. Let me ask you this. If you have turned your back to the altar, if you have said, I would rather look at creation, I would rather look at the kingdom of heaven by myself and determine for myself what it all is, as I've said before, that constitutes a withdrawal of your acknowledgement of your source, which causes you to experience being sourceless and therefore having no identity, because your identity as a son or daughter is derived from the fact that you have a father who is your source. And in this imaginative, independent position, you have no alternative but to experience a state of conflict, which first shows itself as the experience of fear. Now, if it is impossible to share opposing thoughts, and if while you are separated from your Father, you are in a state of conflict, it means that you're not in a position to share anything at all. Which means you are not and have not been sharing anything at all. So what is it that has substituted for sharing? What has substituted for sharing, which can appropriately be identified as communion, has been communication. Communion is an inner awareness of unity with all things. And communion is not a matter of communication. It's a matter of knowing. Universal knowing. Having separated yourself, however, the fact that you're all one has to show up some way, because you can't alter the divine facts. And so, as a substitute for communion, you developed communication. And now you're able to talk to each other and express ideas that you've all made up. And as we've talked about, existence becomes a constant manipulation of each other, so that your definitions of everything are mutually agreed upon. Because if they're not mutually agreed upon, you cannot work together. Your mutually agreed upon definitions constitute a common language, you might say, that allows you to communicate with each other and thus cooperate with each other. Now, the interesting thing is that in the state of communion, the conscious experience of being is universal. It's eternal, and therefore time is not a part of it, and space is not a part of it. But when you turn your back on the clear, uninterrupted, pure awareness of the kingdom of heaven, then it becomes necessary to have time and space in order to appear to cooperate. If you care to have a business meeting, let us say, you have to say, in order to appear to end up having communication, you have to say, I will meet you at the corner of Hollywood and Vine at 10 a.m. on Thursday morning, January 21st. In this way, you can manage to be in the same place at the same time and conduct your manipulative process of feeding your greed. do this. This is life. And you say, oh, let's meet for lunch on Wednesday at such and such a place and just chat. And you get together and you just chat, and you feel like there is communication and sharing. You bring each other up to date on the latest news, and you think there has been sharing. But it says here, it is impossible to share opposing thoughts. And so all the time that you think you have been sharing, you have really been maintaining and reinforcing the idea that you can look at the kingdom of heaven independently of God and function and bring into play all the aspects of being, including sharing. But I'm going to be very frank with you here. Unless you're coming from that place of excellence in you, which is you in your right mind, you're not communicating. And everything you're doing is constantly calculated in order to have an end result that meets your needs. You get together, you chat, and what do? You get the lay of the land. As perceived by the other person. You get the lay of the land as to where that other person is coming from and where the people they know that you know are coming from. Why? Oh, to be sociable. No. At the bottom line, you get the information so that you can know what areas you need to reinforce your vulnerability in. But you're all really slick at it. And you manage to pull it off with an apparently genuine friendliness to it. In fact, you found that the more friendliness you bring into the process, the more harmony there is, the more pleasure there is. But what I want you to understand is that sharing, as it's spoken of in the Course here, is not what I've just described. The closest thing to being in a state of sharing that you could say you've had, in other words, the way being is experienced when you're in your right mind, is one in which cooperation and coordination do not occur. And you do not have space-time coordinates that you use in order to be in communion with your brothers and sisters, and in order for the beauty, the harmony, and the joy of being to be manifest. Now, the closest experience you have to this is when you start out in your day and you have a general plan, but you're not fixed on it. And as the day unfolds, you find yourself in places you hadn't expected to be because you weren't governing everything absolutely. And in the process of flowing with what's happening, you find yourself running into someone you haven't seen for years, or someone you hadn't planned on meeting. And you have an encounter together in which information becomes available to you that meets your need. Being, with a capital B, is a movement. It's a movement orchestrated by the mind of God. It's the movement of creation. And all of creation, like a Broadway musical, all of creation appears to move and dance and sing, we'll say, and appears to be coordinated exquisitely. And yet, each part of creation is not being where it is by design, by prior agreement, by the use of will. Creation is an exquisite movement of the divine mind and what you would call the universe. Everything is where it is because it allowed the Father's impulse to cause it to be where it was. And when you stand and observe it all, the exquisiteness and perfection of the detail of the movement is awesome. And yet not a bit of coordination amongst the participants has occurred. In effect, each part of creation just happens to end up where it is. It just happens to end up where it is. It awesomely ends up being where it is. Sometimes the movement of being occurs even when you are specifically trying to be in charge. You know that you are going to meet so-and-so, and that if you don't meet them on time, you will miss them because they have to catch a plane, and blah, blah, blah. And so you get up in the morning and you conscientiously do everything you can to be at the meeting place at the appointed time, and everything goes wrong. And you end up getting there 25 minutes late. And you walk in the door and bump into the other person you're supposed to meet who just happened to get there 25 minutes late. And you have the opportunity to marvel at the fact that everything was in perfect order in spite of what you thought the order had to be. I'm bringing this out because this is the nature of being. And this is the way sharing happens. Sharing is you being where the Father would have you be, without plans, without conscious control over the situation and the circumstances, without depending upon space and time coordinates in order to have connection. Sharing is communion, not communication. And therefore, sharing is never a matter of wheedling another person into cooperation, wheedling another person into yielding to your best judgment as to what is right, or coercing everyone around you into abiding by the mutually agreed upon definitions that have been developed in place of sharing, in place of communion. It is impossible to share opposing thoughts. It's a very full sentence. Continuing. The Holy Spirit does not let you forsake your brothers. What does that mean? If the Holy Spirit is nothing more than your right mind, how does your right mind not let you forsake your brothers? Well, let me put it this way. When you're coming from an independent stance, and you're going through all this process that I've just described of using time-space coordinates in order to communicate, nothing real is happening. You cannot actually accomplish the unaccomplishable. You cannot actually accomplish being independent from the Father. The Holy Spirit does not let you forsake your brothers. Therefore, you can really share only the parts of your thoughts which are of Him and which He also keeps for you. And of such is the kingdom of heaven. All the rest, all the stuff you made up, all of the distorted perceptions of reality that you have created, all the rest remains with you until He, the Holy Spirit, has reinterpreted them in the light of the kingdom, making them too worthy of being shared. So you see, reality doesn't allow unreality to actually happen. When they, the definitions, the concepts you have made up about the kingdom of heaven, when they have been sufficiently purified, He lets you give them away. He lets you give them away. That's because you're not blocking the fruitage of your right mind with your own concepts. And so, the truth you know, the love you experience being, ends up being given away, shared, because at that point you're coming from that place of excellence in you and not from the other operating system, the ego's operating system. The will to share them is their purification. Your intent to share from your right mind is what ends up purifying, getting rid of the false from the concepts you have created about everything and about everyone. And in the absence of the impurity of your distortions that you've introduced, the true knowing about your brother and the true knowing about every aspect of creation flows from you, because that is the only thing there is for you to share. That's the only thing that can be shared. Again, if you have an IBM, a PC computer, and you have an Apple computer, it is impossible to share data between the two because they're in two different languages. And so sharing doesn't occur. Now, in what way could this be useful knowledge? How can it be other than depressing to believe what I've just said, that knowing that you're not awake at the moment, everything you're doing amounts to nothing? Well, here's the way it can be helpful. No matter how independent, no matter how independent you believe you have become, you haven't stopped being the Christ. And you only have one mind, and that is the mind of Christ. That is the mind of God, expressed right where you are. And as I've said before, you're using this omnipotent divine mind in a distorted way, and in the process you are creating distorted perceptions of reality or the kingdom of heaven. Your exploration of a distorted state of mind has created what you might call a carbon copy, a virtual copy, let us say, of reality. The only thing is that everything is 180 degrees out of sync. This means that because you haven't stopped being the Christ and you only have reality to work with, you have been working with reality in an oppositional way, in a way that denies what it really is, but affirms that it's something else. If you realize that this is true, then it becomes obvious to you that everything that you are doing that is the reverse of reality isn't accomplishing anything, but it doesn't leave you out in the void. Because whether you, the Christ, the divine mind that is God manifest right where you are, is creating a distorted perception of reality or not, you're still real, and reality is still real. And reality, because it's the thing you're manipulating, will be there as it truly is the moment you decide to abandon the manipulation of it.